State legislature back in session. Democrats, of course, pulled off a trifecta. Why do I feel like it's Bougie Day, hashtag 2013, all over again? Michael Fields is Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Gail. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you on this? Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, too.
Appreciate it. So am I too far off base where I think we're going back into time?
Well, I think, every time a session starts, I think we're not safe until they go home in May, and no matter who's in charge. But I think especially this year, you can see with Democrats having control of the legislature, totally having the governor's mansion, that a lot of things are going to move pretty quickly. And I think a lot of things that aren't great for our state. And so these debates will be going on. And on Friday, they started session, and, leadership had their speeches. The new governor is going to be, inaugurated tomorrow, and then Thursday will be the state of the state for him. So there's already over 100 bills that have been dropped on the first day of session. And so this is going to come pretty quickly. And, we'll see how it turns out.
Of those bills that were dropped, what concerns you the most?
Well, I think you look at some of the energy bills are going to be problematic. We talked about this, before the election, but, Prop 112, the setbacks bill failed, but they're coming after setbacks again. You have another group who's asking the governor to have a moratorium on any new wells. So I think on the energy front, there's some concerning stuff. In these current bills that are already out there, there's a public option, so healthcare. There's a healthcare bill. It's a 1-year pilot program, but we know that'll turn into a statewide plan. And what worries me about that is with the public option out there, taxpayers are on the hook when they don't know the cost, and every government program is more expensive than you think it's going to be, and then taxpayers are on the hook for bailing that out. And so I'd like to see more free market healthcare solutions. But they're going to come after Tabor too. So there's kind of a long list of things, and things I hope they work on, like transportation, that's been neglected for too long.
I had to love it just in advance of the opportunity to talk with you this morning, just doing a little bit of cursory background research, which I'm prone to do. Came across a piece in Western Wire, former Colorado State Representative Joe Salazar assuming the role of Executive Director of Colorado Rising, not to be confused with that. That's right, with Colorado Rising Action. I think that you are at polar opposite ends of the spectrum there. But he is promising to take on what he refers to as the fossil fuel dragon in his new leadership role. And see, that just so concerns me because it seems to me that we've got the legislators saying, well, that's really, really nice, voters of Colorado, that you voted down Prop 112, but we actually know better.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really concerning about this. Joe Salazar, people who follow this are no stranger to his extreme positions. But I think, the point is we already have some of the toughest regulations in the country on oil and gas. And we also, the economic forecast for the state came out, and we have $1 billion surplus, even after getting Tabor refunds is what they're projecting. Now, the legislature will go after that money and try not to give it back to us, but $1 billion surplus, and a lot of that, if you look at it, comes from our oil and gas industry. A lot of the local revenue, why we can fund schools. If you knock out our energy sector in this state, you're going to have a lot of people out of work. You're going to have a lot of less revenue to the government. So I think the legislature needs to be very careful before they listen to, the other Colorado Rising.
Well, and I think the point also needs to be made. Many people under the mistaken impression that, increased setbacks would affect only the oil and gas industry. No, there is a very prolific trickle-down effect.
Yeah, and especially on education, something that people are very concerned about, teachers getting paid enough, especially in certain areas of our state. I saw a number, $250 million a year that just goes to these local, school districts because of it. So, no, it has a large impact on the economy. If people are out of work, they don't buy other things. It is a big backbone to our state's economy. And one of the reasons why we have the number one economy in the country right now. So I think, looking at these bills, it'll be interesting to see kind of what exactly comes up and how Governor Polis responds to it, because he's been kind of on both sides of this issue, came out against 112, but, a few years before that was promoting a 2,000-foot setback.
Yeah,
so
2,000 feet, okay.
Yeah.
Gotta love it. Hey, I wanted to see if you could stick with us for another segment because, speaking of Governor Polis, I can't help but wonder how far left he's going to take the state. Yeah. Wanted to get your thoughts on that and a few other issues as well. So can you stick with us?
Sounds good. Yes.
That'd be great. More with Executive Director, Colorado Rising Action, Michael Fields, in just a few. 8:14. We're jumping into the fire with the 2019 state legislative session underway. 8:23 now, 1310 KFKA, 1310 KFKA.com as our conversation continues this morning with Michael Fields, Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action. All right, so let's cut to the chase, Michael. How far left is Governor Polis going to take the state?
I think that's still to be determined. I think he'll take us pretty far left on some issues, and then maybe not as far on others. If you look at his track record, I'm really interested to see how he talks about things during his State of the State. Last week the leaders in both the House and the Senate spoke, and in the Senate, Senate President coming in, Leroy Garcia, talked about bipartisanship. He talked about how no party has a monopoly on good ideas and how we need to work together. If you went over to the House, where they have a 17-seat majority on the Democratic side, very different tone. We're going to pass this. We're going to go after that, and paid family leave, red flags bills, and on and on. And I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of tone Governor Polis sets. And I think the other thing that's interesting is everybody knew that Governor Hickenlooper really wasn't going to weigh in on much during the legislative process. He was going to sign or not sign bills. We don't know when Governor Polis is going to weigh in, if he is early, if he's going to be just vetoing stuff or signing it. So I think there's a lot to see, and we'll know pretty quickly how far left we're going to go.
Perfect segue. I was talking a little bit earlier about that red flag legislation in terms of be careful what you wish for. On the surface, well, I suppose it could be argued it's a plausible idea, particularly with the spate of school shootings, shootings across the country that we have seen. But unfortunately, it seems to me to be well-intentioned, but rife with all sorts of issues. Senator John Cook writing an opinion piece in the Tribune noting that, but also saying that, this last go-round was a bad time for law enforcement, crime victims, and public safety, because expect to see just an entire raft of bills that aren't good for law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with Senator Cook. I mean, last year this red flag bill came in the last week of session, and you really couldn't, delve into what the details were. This year it'll come a little bit earlier, but my concern is, what is it going to look like? What amendments are done? And with Democrats having such huge majorities, I'm always going to be looking at the amendments on the bills. What a far left legislator throws in there. But I think on the red flag, it is a good, good intentions.
Mm-hmm.
You look at stuff like happened with, Officer Parrish. That should have never happened. But I think without the proper due process in this, and that's what a lot of the legislators feared this last time, and saying, look, different states have different ways to deal with this. Some of them, aren't that bad, and some of them are horrible. And so, really depends on what Colorado gets out of this. And so it'll be a one that I'm sure a lot of people will be focused into and watching, especially after what happened in 2013 with the recalls.
Yeah, we're seeing cuts or proposed cuts across the board when you look at a very important component of that equation, and that is mental health. And a lot of our mental health providers, we've talked with the representatives from North Range Behavioral Health, that is in the trenches, helping those who are going through some traumatic times in their life. And there's talk about, well, we're going to take a whole bunch of money due to reorganization and we're going to give it to the suits in terms of administrative funding instead of to those people that are really making a difference. And I know they were waiting to see what the legislature would do about that.
Yeah, and I think this is something where you look at that $1 billion surplus that we have. To up some of these mental health services doesn't cost that much, and I think it should be a priority. There was an article that came out that said 22 of our counties don't have a licensed psychiatrist in the whole county, and so I think this is definitely an issue that needs to be tackled, especially before we start, taking people's guns. We need to address the mental health crisis that really is happening across our state. And so I'm hoping that legislators look at that $1 billion surplus and are very careful with what they put it towards, and I hope some of that money does go towards mental health.
So once again, the Democrats in complete control at the state level. Do the Republicans have any play whatsoever?
Not a whole lot, but I think in the Senate, where there's only a 3-seat majority and you have a few of the senators on the Democratic side that tend to be a little bit more business friendly, I think that's where a lot of these battles are going to happen. Senator Holbert, who is the leader, the minority leader for the Republicans in the Senate, came out and said, you know what, with this surplus that we have, we'll support more money going into education, $350 million or so, if you put $350 million into transportation. So he was trying to do some deal making with those 16 votes that he has out of the gate. But I think more than anything, Republicans have to provide a alternative policy and really try to educate people about what's going on and the process, and then see what happens with the Senate Democrats and with Governor Polis.
No shortage of things to talk about as this 2019 legislative session gets underway. And Michael Fields, Executive Director, Colorado Rising Action, will be joining us on a bi-weekly basis. So appreciate your being available to do just that, because there's a lot to cover. That said, where do we learn more about Colorado Rising Action?
So it's coloradorisingaction.org. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. So follow us, and I'm looking forward to being on here every other week with you.
Certainly do appreciate it. Michael Fields, Executive Director, Colorado Rising Action.